Okay, just like there's problems with the modernization models, as I mentioned, there are also problems with the dependency models, primarily that being insular never seems to solve nations' problems. It tends to compound their problems. All nations are completely dependent on each other. So, yes, dependency is true and has its drawbacks, but it's probably inevitable. Now there are some sustainable models, which are also kind of non enthusiastic about capitalism or modernization theory. A sustainable model is a reaction to this unfettered modernist idea, because if every nation enjoyed the lifestyle that the United States does, we would destroy, we'd have too many landfills, too much carbon footprint, and it's just not realistic that that sort of lifestyle of living can be transferred to the planet. So is it desirable, to have that kind of growth? We will outgrow our resources. And so sustainable development looks for some other alternative for privately owned cars, for water supply, for electric supply, a cap on meat and oil consumption, because meat is tied to high carbon footprint. And so there's degrowth of a degrowth view. Now we're going to look at some grassroots models. There's the holistic view or the transformational development view, and then there's rights-based views, which instead of looking at economic development are looking at specific groups of vulnerable populations. And then we'll look at microloans. So holistic development, as I had in a previous slide, looks for not just bringing financial capabilities like livelihood and security, but also knowledge, equity. It needs to be sustainable. And so the goal here, sustainability is not the goal, you'll notice. Sustainability is a principle, but the goal is flourishing, or in this case, it's called responsible well-being. Capabilities are not the goal. Education in itself is not the goal, but and livelihood economics is not the goal. It's well-being, flourishing, which capabilities and livelihood and security are a process toward getting that, but is not the goal in itself. That's a very interesting thing. Asset-based community development is typically a process for fostering grassroots level development. Instead of coming in from the outside with a modernist view that says everybody needs to be working, let's create a scarcity mindset of everybody should be consuming. Let's see what local communities' goals are. I went around in the nation where I worked and asked people, what's your dream? We have the American dream, which is to own 2 cars and a vacation house and a boat. And, what's the Nigerian dream? What's the Australian dream? What's the Chinese dream? Well, in Vanuatu, the goal wasn't that their children would consume and consume and consume, or would spend 25 years in education before having loans they need to pay back the rest of their life. The goal was that everybody would continue to live on the land and be subsistence farmers. So you ask most children in the education system, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's to continue to live off the land like their parents, which they use the word gardener. So development instead identifies, well, what are your needs then? What goals are you setting? Do you have goals about water, sanitary water? Do you have goals about ending malaria? Do you have goals about, education? And so you find what local communities' goals are, and you have a way of measuring that goal. Okay, how many women will not die of childbirth next year as opposed to the previous year? And so you set a goal that is important to them, and you have a way of verifying that, and then you talk about a process for making that happen. Our goal, our village had 5 women die from childbirth the 1 year, and they set a goal for no women to die the next year, and their means for attaining that would be every woman gives birth in the clinic or in the hospital, rather than in the village. And they attained that goal year after we came. So within transformational development, it asks, what do we appreciate? What's going on? What are we doing well? What could be different about us? What would be flourishing that we don't currently have? What should that goal be? And then how can we continue to increase the things we're doing well? And so this has to do with appreciative inquiry, co-constructing, and envisioning an impact with people. This is dreaming with them rather than paternalistically coming in and developing them. There are some misconceptions about development. One is that it's overwhelming. This comes from Rich Starcher's EMQ article on development. And it can be, because so often our development efforts fail. But another is that development is us helping them. And as I've discussed in the previous slides, it can be people attacking realistic goals rather than overwhelming goals, and them setting their own goals. And we're helping in the sense of we are facilitating goal setting and facilitating a thinking process about how people will develop. The third is that development is material, and transformational development has debunked that idea and has consistently argued that development is more about restoring relationships with God, with self, with the land, with others, and not just about having capital and finances. I'm going to skip that one. So microfinance is one approach that has been used in development, and it's a strategy that says, if the founder of Grameen Bank, Yunus Muhammad, noticed that a woman would make a grass basket, and the vast majority of money she earned from it she had to use to pay back the person who loaned her the money for the materials. And so he would hand out these loans. He knew that women entrepreneurs would use the money on something to benefit their family rather than smoking the money away, and that they would pay back their loans. And so microfinance really took off as a method of saying, let's invest capital into the communities. It was not focused on other goals, particularly like advocacy, changing government's policies, creating more fair trade. It was specifically infusing cash. But notice that a lot of microfinance has fairly high interest rates, and people have attacked it for that. The more predatory that this becomes on the poorest of the poor can have its drawback. So some do it well and some don't, and I would point you to the textbook Transforming Microfinance. You can see a comparison of a number of approaches here of microfinance. Some of them have hundreds of millions of dollars to loan out, and often to women. You can see that in some of these cases, 93% of the people receiving the loans are women, 76%, 74%, 66%, 82%. The average loan size is in the hundreds of dollars. We're talking between $70 and $400 here, and the repayment rate in many of these cases is up at 90%, which most banks would absolutely love, wouldn't they, to get so much of their money back, repaid back. And so often these microfinance loans also have a savings component, that you're not just paying back the loan, but you're putting aside money. You're learning this behavior of when you do entrepreneurial activity, you pay back your loans, but you also save capital for the future. And so these loans have been used to bring nations out of poverty, to bring communities out of poverty by teaching about finance, about savings, about investing. And so it's hopefully the positives of this will continue on long into the future. The issue often is that a community will borrow money for for an entrepreneurial activity and then not use the money for that. They have an idea that isn't going to work. We're going to purchase a truck for a taxi, and then it turns out that nobody has the money to pay for the taxi, or that all of the people who would ride in it are uncles and brothers and sisters, and so they don't pay for it. And so the taxi requires the gas and the auto parts, but nobody is infusing money into it. And so they can't pay back their loans, but there's this tremendous pressure to pay it back. And so that can be very difficult for people. Now, notice the Millennium Development Goals. It's very interesting. None of the Millennium Development Goals relied on this neoliberal development ethic of modernization. They weren't Rostow stages. They didn't say that people would increase their income. Instead, they were focused on social needs. Educating women was, for instance, one. We'll look at some of the other development goals, but they had to do with eradication of diseases. And so that's a retreat from the modernist view and more attacking other issues that kind of get in the way of people, of nations being able to develop. Here's a very interesting approach toward development: just send cash. number of organizations do this. People in Africa know how to use their money best. Who needs a person from the United States telling them, first of all, siphoning off part of the donations for their own good, and then telling them how to use it. And so this is kind of a move, even among high-level economists and development experts, to just send cash. And so it would be interesting to hear your ideas on that. Remittances are a very interesting approach. The notion that there's a lot of transnationalism migration, that's a development approach. People leave the Philippines and come to the United States, and they develop the Philippines by working in the United States and sending remittances back. And so a lot of the Caribbean nations rely on workers in the United States sending their money back. Well, that's a model of development. As a matter of fact, if you look at the way that cash has gone into foreign nations as a means of development, overseas direct aid has gone up somewhat each year, ODA. You can see the black line there increases a little bit. You can see that foreign direct investment, people being willing to open businesses, which brings jobs, is a way of developing foreign nations. But it spiked right before the recession in 2008 and went down. But it was a large part of the story of development in the past 20 years. But remittances continue to go up and are more recession-proof, as you can see in the blue line here, that people are sending their money back. And so it will be increasingly an important part of how foreign nations are developed. Very fascinating idea there. All right, just to summarize the development theories here, you have the market-driven view of modernization theory and neoliberal economics, which wants to bring entrepreneurs to give microloans. The goal is higher GDP. And the theorists who back this up are your authors of one of your textbooks, Grudem and Asmus, and Walt Rostow, Thomas Friedman. There are the government approaches of governments need to either be insular and to create tariffs. This was kind of the Keynesian economics. It was the isolationism of the 1970s and 80s under structuralism. And Gustavo Gutierrez, as a liberation theologian, was one behind this, as well as Karl Marx. The notion that the government needs to control how this is done. Then there's the holistic focus at the community level, the grassroots level, which brings in asset-based community development and looks for local goals being met. So Corbett and Fickert and Bryant and Myers are examples of this, transformational development. There's the Human Development Index, which also is a holistic view, but tends to look more at macro issues. And then there's the anti-growth views like sustainable development. So these are some various ideas about what development is and how to attain it.